We're here in St. Hagop Church, Armenian Church in Pinellas County in Pinellas Park, Florida. And my guest is, once again, Fr Hovnan, the pastor here at St. Hagop. Thank you very much for being here and for allowing us into your home. This is beautiful.
Of course. Welcome, welcome.
I thought we'd talk about the divine liturgy of the Armenian Church.
Sure.
It might be very interesting to see the differences and similarities of the liturgy as it represents the differences and similarities of our brotherhood as Christians.
Sure.
First of all, we have the Pope as the head of our church.
Sure.
Jesus is the head, but
Yes.
the Pope is his emissary here on earth.
Sure.
Who is the physical head of the Armenian Church?
The head of the church is Gardigin II, who is our supreme patriarch, and we call Catholicos. And he, the Holy See, is in Etchmiadzin, which is just 20 minutes outside of the capital of the state of Armenia.
Oh, okay.
Yerevan, the state of Armenia.
And you call him
Catholicos.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yes, and that means universal,
Universal,
meaning
Catholic, yeah.
universal head of Armenians, but probably,
Absolutely.
So we've had a tradition of this supreme patriarch since our first one, and it was Gregory the Illuminator, who is also on one of the icons of our church, but he was the bishop trained in Caesarea, who then came to be our patron saint and converted our people. And so Armenians will probably be first to tell you that they're proud of the fact that they were the first Christian nation as their sort of official creed of the people, because the king and the nobles were all converted by Gregory at the same time. So it was sort of.
And what century was that?
This was, Armenians say 301. A lot of scholars will say 306, 308, 310, but still before Constantine.
Right,
yes.
that's great.
Yeah.
Excellent. So the church moved out.
Yeah.
Okay. The basic similarities and differences of our two churches.
Basic similarities and differences. The first thing
I hesitate saying our churches, plural,
Yeah.
because it's one church, but
Yeah.
our creeds, our participation.
The essence of theology, in my opinion, 95, 98% exactly the same. But the manifestations of it through the traditions of the church, you can notice some things different as you experience that worship in that church. The first thing you might experience is you might see me, Fr Hovnan, with a 4-year-old boy and a 2-week-old girl.
Congratulations, Father, right? That's
Thank
wonderful.
you. With me. So in our church, we have married priests and celibate priests.
Okay.
And like the Orthodox Church,
Do you, can you be married before you become priest? And
you have to be married before you become a priest, if you're going to be married.
Okay,
Yes.
so
Yes.
once you're a priest.
No marriage after priesthood.
No,
yes.
okay, interesting.
After ordination. Yeah.
Okay. So, and you were married before, and how long were you married?
Before. It's a tough question.
Oh,
There goes 13 years.
She's going to listen to this.
Yes.
What is your wife's name?
Anna.
Anna.
Yes.
And the baby's name is Nora?
Nor's the new one, and Narek, who was the aforementioned saint raised by, doctor of the church, raised by Francis. It's after him, Gregory of Narek.
Great.
Right, so that would be one difference.
That's a sociological
Sure.
issue.
Sure.
We're not going to.
And that's been traditional for us all along the way. And there's mostly married priests are priests of churches, but not exclusively. You'll have married priests that are at least partially in the hierarchy, and then you'll have celibate priests who are in parishes. But traditionally, it was supposed to be the unmarried priests were the hierarchy, and the married priests were the parish priests.
Oh, interesting. And if you trace the history of the Western Church too, that kind of breakdown also applied to the Irish Church in the early centuries, in the monastic communities, the married versus the unmarried, and the roles that each had. Okay.
Sure.
Okay, so you have a married clergy.
So, all right, yeah, so I figured to start with that as an obvious difference. And then you would also notice, for those of your viewers who were used to the old Latin rite, they would probably feel very at home and understand pretty quickly our service, which is still in the Latin of Armenian. So our service is in ancient Armenian. It's beautiful, and many of the word roots contain things in them that can't be replicated and are beautiful if you can study, but it, of course, puts a great burden on our parishioners and our priests of education to make sure that people know what they're praying.
Yes.
And, one of the helps to this is The pew book is very important in our church. We have it in Armenian language, modern Armenian, but also in English transliteration and in English translation so that people can follow the liturgy. There's a sign, that black sign up there tells what page you're on. But if you've been here, you know, a good 10, 15, 20 times, you know what's happening, and you can start to pray the liturgy in the ancient language.
Well, not the baby, but does your child speak Armenian?
Well, so he's 4 years old, and he speaks some Armenian. His mom and dad should do a better job of that, but his grandma helps with that because his grandma's from Armenia.
Okay.
And but he will. The thing is, there's the old Armenian, which he knows some from studying church things with his dad already at 4 years old.
Good.
But also then there's two versions of modern Armenian. There's the Eastern dialect and the Western. And so it's a little bit challenging to figure those two out. But and our church is probably 30% Armenian speaking.
Oh, okay.
Pretty much 95% understands English, but 30% I would say maybe are more comfortable with Armenian than English. And so the service is in ancient Armenian, the readings are in English, and the sermon is in English plus every other time also a small sermon in Armenian, in modern Armenian.
Oh, okay. So you adapt. And
We
as
try.
as the community gets younger, do you envision language changing, or?
It's already in a place where it's an issue, and it's one that's been discussed in our diocese and had various periods of being more conservative towards language and liberal. We're now in a more conservative position towards the language of the liturgy. Our Supreme Patriarch has said it will stay in this, and but all the sacraments can have basically as much vernacular as you need.
Oh, okay. Right.
And other services besides the Sunday service. And in our church, another difference is perhaps just because of numbers, but maybe other reasons as well. We have a long Sunday Divine Liturgy that's about 2 hours. So, yeah, so
Okay, Catholics,
you Catholics,
hear that.
you have it well, you have it well. And, but ours is worth 2, no, just, but we have that long service on Sunday, and so we don't really have enough numbers to have a second Mass on Sunday.
I see.
And at that
I
length,
see.
you wouldn't do that anyway. And then we also don't have, well, we have in our tradition to do Divine Liturgy on feast days, of which there's many throughout the
Sure.
year, on Tuesday, Saturday, whatnot. But in the modern world, it's mostly a Sunday 2-hour,
Okay.
Sunday liturgy.
You just slipped in the word Mass. Do you also call it Mass?
Yes, but that's
I know it's
a
Divine
Latin
Liturgy.
word, but yes, but I use that word too.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, so-
And ours is just to look on those words. Mass is a great word for the liturgy. I believe it comes from the blessing at the end of the Mass to go forth and to go into the world. Our word for the Mass is badarak, and badarak is an Armenian word which means sacrifice or offering. So that's at the heart of ours, that Christ is, of course, offered, and we offer ourselves and our time, talent, and treasure and prayers and worship during Sunday, and Christ and God offers
Excellent.
himself through Christ in that Eucharist. So
Beautiful. Tell me what a person would see if he or she came to the liturgy for the first time here in the. First of all, how many people sit here? It can fit.
So this is a small, medium-sized Armenian church. So now in summer in Florida, you would probably only see 40 or 50 people on a given Sunday, and then in the winter you'd get into
Right.
about 100
Sure.
as an average. And what you would see would be a priest adorned in many vestments. We still have the symbolism as the priest in his office as Christ the King and representing that.
Right, right.
And you would also see a pre-Vatican II thing where I face the altar.
Yes.
And I turn back, of course, at various times. And in the sermon, of course, I face the people, but we still face the altar with that older understanding that I'm somehow offering prayers on behalf of the people and also ministering Christ's sacrifice and God's sacrifice back to the people.
And I noticed at the head of the altar, the icon of Mary, the Theotokos.
Yes.
Why her and not Jesus?
Sure. So every Armenian church will have the icon of Mary and Jesus, and that is because of the connection which is actually explicit in our liturgy between Christ coming to the world through Mary and the Incarnation, in the same way that Christ comes into the world through communion and through the bread and the wine, the body and the blood. So that's the main, I think, theological connection there. And all Armenian churches are to face east.
Oh,
And,
so we're facing
yeah,
east.
that's the rule, and 95% of them do, unless in the case of some communities that purchased Protestant churches, let's say,
Oh,
that
right,
weren't
right.
facing east. They didn't. We didn't turn the whole church.
Right.
But yes, and so you would see that different. A priest with vestments and incense and a high liturgy, again, more like the Tridentine rite, I would think.
Right.
But all of the pieces are the same as the Latin, right? All the major pieces. You have the liturgy of the word first, and the entrance of the gospel and the readings, and then you have the liturgy of the Eucharist as a second part. And I think, again, any Catholic who is familiar with the old rite would have no trouble identifying the major pieces of what's happening,
Right.
even in this different language.
You mentioned that your liturgy is composed of liturgies borrowed from other denominations.
Well, let me put it this way.
Communities.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's borrowed. I think it's uniquely, well, yeah, it's uniquely Armenian at its core, and it grew definitely, its major cousin that it grew out of was the Syriac rites. But what I meant to say is that we met Catholics at an early period in our history. So let's say, the Crusades.
Right.
The first Crusades is when many Catholics came down to Armenia on the way to Jerusalem, and they
Right,
found
right.
Christians there, and this very interesting mix. And our church, I think, at its best has always, first of all, it's always realized as such a small church that it didn't have all the answers about Christianity because it was so small they could never justify that. Any rational person
Wow.
couldn't justify that. But the other thing was that it was unique in its one way, but it also didn't have a problem with adding things that it thought were blessed from other traditions without replacing its own. So, for example, and I'm not a liturgist, but my main teacher at seminary was, and we have the first 5 minutes of our worship is, I believe, taken from a very old Latin rite, the prayers before the altar.
Oh, right, right.
But we would never change and put something in the core of our worship. We just would add to the beginning and the end. And so we added these in the beginning. We also added, I believe, something that had a Catholic background to the end of our service that we finished with the Gospel of Dismissal of John 1.
Right. That's those are pre-Vatican
Yeah.
aspects of. I remember the Adeum qui latificat juventutem meum before the liturgy really began, and of course we thought, as growing up, that was part of it, but it was a preface to the liturgy.
Sure,
and then of course the last gospel, which was.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about it. The masses ended, but the priest went over to the side and read the Gospel of John, and we all listened to it. In the beginning was the Word.
Yep.
Beautiful.
So in that way, but the core though is very old, and we have I think a 7th century writings about our divine liturgy already formed as it is, and certainly it's older than that. But this was the first theological written. How do you say in English? Making a commentary on the on that, and it's beautiful. And what else for differences? There's a few other things you would note, and these are minor, but communion is given by intinction, so bread of one host dipped into wine and given to people.
Does the deacon assist you, or?
We don't have Eucharistic ministers
Okay.
In our church, and the deacon assists in a lot of liturgical aspects. He doesn't necessarily assist in that unless there's a need to, because there's, for some reason, there can't be a priest present. So a priest could bless the Eucharist in one place, reserve some, and a deacon could distribute it if necessary.
Yes. You don't have reservation. You don't have the Blessed Sacrament reserved.
We have a bit reserved for sacraments in the week between Sundays,
Okay,
basically.
okay,
Yes.
okay.
Yes, but
And-
not, I don't think, in the same way that Catholics do.
Do your congregations feel comfortable to pray to Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament? And would you call the Blessed Sacrament?
I think they feel no problem with it. It's just not a common practice that
Okay.
has grown up in our church. There's, I guess you could say that, some of our churches, they have either relics on the altar, or sometimes they have a host on the altar, and in that way, I suppose they are praying to the sacrament by
Right.
just being in church and praying
Right.
in front of the church.
And the Eucharist, do you call it Blessed Sacrament?
Oh, we don't. we'd call it the Eucharist. We would have no problem with calling it Blessed
Right,
Sacrament.
right,
Yeah.
right. And how many sacraments do you have?
Right. So that's another.
I'm really giving you a run for your money.
we have 7 sacraments, and we took that understanding from the Roman and Western Church.
Okay.
But with a big caveat that we really, a more basic understanding from our church, the word for sacrament, like in Greek, is mystery. Mysterion in Greek,
Yes.
choros in Armenian. And so for us, there's a much broader understanding of what a sacrament is than the 7. Many different things can mediate God's grace,
Yes.
And ordain to mediate and even affect God's grace. Things like, our blessing of the harvesting grapes, for example.
Charity,
There's an official
absolutely.
sacraments, things like that.
Yeah,
So,
right.
But yes, there is those 7. Back to the small differences between the divine liturgy that you'd experience. We have a general confession, so it is okay and even occurs that one would come to a priest to confess or to talk, but it's not a requirement, and it's certainly not probably as prevalent in your church to have private confession with the priest.
Okay.
We have a general confession that's in the book that we all pray and say before receiving communion.
At every Mass.
At every Mass.
And basically, we have our penitential rite was a mini version of that.
Sure.
Okay, interesting.
And I would think that those are the main differences that I can think of. Otherwise,
A lot of
I'm
singing?
very familiar. Oh, right. The whole liturgy is sung.
The whole liturgy. Oh,
Sung and chanted.
beautiful.
Yeah, so
And do people respond?
you have to have a good voice for it. No, you don't. I'm evidence of that. But no, you have to at least have good effort at singing on Sunday.
Right.
So yes, there's the deacons parts, the priest parts, and the choir, and the people hopefully also participate in the song and the prayer, and yes, and so that also contributes to its length.
Okay.
And in the Eastern mind, certainly, for better or for worse, I think that the Catholic understanding of liturgy, which is great in certain ways, is concise, concise prayer, and don't
Right.
take longer to say things that don't need to take longer. And the Eastern mind is very different than that. It's okay to keep on repeating yourself and embellishing and to...
Well, recently, with the last 4 years, the prayers of our liturgy have been revised. This is even from Vatican II. And those in charge of it, and this is only my opinion, I'm not the official word of the church, those prayers, I think, went through this kind of reorientation, and they became like the longer and more complicated, the better.
Right.
I don't so much agree with that, but
Right.
they're long and they're complicated, and they're sometimes it's one sentence in a paragraph this long.
sure,
But that's those who change, and it's their prayers, and
Sure.
it's part of our church tradition now.
Yeah, and that's an interesting, I know one of those changes because, for example, in our church, when I bless the congregation and say, peace be with you, in Armenian,
Yes.
they always say, and with your spirit.
Yes.
And I know that the Catholic Church went back to that, which
Yes.
I assume was disorienting to a lot of people, but
course,
it
yeah.
also had a good theological reason. I guess it's theology versus practicality, and
we made a big deal of it.
yeah.
It's still, and I do yoga. At the end of yoga, we say namaste to each other, which is that the divine in me, greets the divine in you. It's with your spirit. It really is. So,
Sure.
Ecum spiritu tuto, you, and also with you and with your spirit. They're all
Sure.
variations, and I think the more we relax with that
Sure.
concept, the more at ease we'll be with greeting each other and sending our spirits to each other.
Sure.
This has been wonderful, and we can go on, and we will go on at another segment. I really appreciate
Thank
you
you.
having us, Father.
All right, bless
This has been Father Louis Scurti with Fr Hovnan here at St. Hagop Church in Pinellas Park, Florida, and we're going to come back with another segment, and I'm going to ask Father in that other segment to give us a little overview of the architecture of this beautiful church. Thank you for joining us. Let me hear from you. Father Lou, Father Lou Scurti at hotmail.com. God bless you.